Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video we're going to learn the 2 or 4 player game Tellstones King's Gambit, designed by Chris Cantrell and published by Riot Games, who helped sponsor this video. Okay, look, I realize if you're a regular viewer of the show, you're used to me taking the games off the shelf, tossing them in the air, giving a little twirl, and then catching it again before we move on. But despite its size, this is a heavy game. It's like a brick. If I throw this and something goes wrong, I could end up with a minor concussion or break a toe even. So I thought this time maybe it wouldn't be such a good idea. Okay? No, it's not okay. You need the twirl. All right, but if something goes wrong, that's on you. Oh, okay. Well, we're fine. Let's continue. Runeterra is the world of the very popular League of Legends video game, and in that world there's a game played by its people there called Tellstones. And now you and a friend can play it for yourselves, or up to 4 players can play it in the team mode that we'll also discuss later. But either way, here you'll be using your wits, your memory, and maybe a bit of deception to try to outfox your opponents. So join me at the table and let's learn how to play. Before setting up, I just wanted to show you the inside of the game's containers. It's quite a lovely production with a spot for each component, so they stay securely in place when you're carrying it. To set up, lay out the royal blue playmat between the 2 players. This is known as the line. And then have each player set one of these scoring tokens on their side of the mat near their scoring spaces here. Beside the line, also set the 7 stones face up into what will be referred to as the pool. These pieces will show the knight, crown, scales, hammer, shield, sword, and flag. Next, the single stone is placed face up in the middle of the line, and it's not uncommon to have the scales placed first, as this is a symbol of balance and fairness, but players can also just choose randomly if they'd like. You now select a person to be the first player, and this can be decided randomly, but in some regions of Runeterra, it's traditional for the oldest player to decide who will go first. But either way, that's the setup. In Tellstones, you and your opponent will be taking turns placing stones onto the line and then rearranging them. And the game becomes a mental tug of war based on what you know, what you think you know, and what you think your opponent knows. Bit by bit, you'll be challenging each other's memory of the line until you're ready to call the other person's bluff. The game is played over a series of turns, with players sitting on opposite sides of the line, and then starting with the first player and going back and forth, players will take turns until the game is over. And on your turn, you will take one of 6 possible actions, and all of these are detailed on the included player aids, and there's one for each person. So let's take a look at the first possible action, called Place. With this action, you point to any stone in the pool and tell your opponent to place it face up either to the left or right of the stones already in the line. You can never place a new stone between other ones. Now, instead of choosing to place, a person might pick the hide action by pointing to any one face-up stone in the line and asking for it to be flipped over. Their opponent then flips it face down, but its position within the line doesn't change. Here we are a little later into the game, and let's say instead of placing or hiding, you want to perform the swap action. To do this, you point to any 2 stones in the line, and then your opponent will swap their positions, keeping them facing the exact same way that they were before they moved. Now here's something very important to understand. When you're performing a swap, your opponent needs to swap the stones that you point to, but they should ignore what you say. In other words, you can say whatever you want to try to create some confusion, but it's what you point to that they have to swap. Here, let me show you a quick example. Here I might say, I want you to swap the flag and the shield. Well, this is not the flag. It can't be. The flag is right here. But they still need to swap the 2 that I pointed to, even though I mislabeled one of them or maybe even both of them. And this might cause them to second guess what they believe these symbols are, which is pretty sneaky. The important thing to understand here is that when you're taking the place, hide, or swap action, although you decide which stones are affected and how, it's your opponent who carries out the action for you. For example, if you wanted to hide a stone, you wouldn't flip it over. You'd point out which one you want hidden, and then they'd flip it for you. You're also probably starting to realize that as players take actions, more and more stones will end up on the line, get moved around and even hidden. And throughout all of this, each of you will be trying to keep track of which stones are where. Obviously, the face-up ones are very easy to keep track of. The face-down ones, though, not so much. Eventually, you might start to suspect that your opponent is losing track of the stones, perhaps because you're starting to lose track, in which case you might want to take the challenge action. Here, you point to any one face-down stone and say, I challenge you to name this stone. Your opponent then has to name what they think it is, and then they flip it over. If they guessed correctly, they score 1 point. If they guessed incorrectly, you score 1 point. But either way, the stone is then left face up where it was until it's hidden again with a future hide action. Anytime you gain a point during the game, you move your scoring token one space up on the scoring track on your side of the line, and as soon as a player has 3 points, they immediately win. Of course, no one's memory is perfect, so what do if you forget what symbol is on a face-down stone and you're afraid your opponent might challenge you about it? Well, that's where the peek action can come in very handy. Here, you pick any one face-down stone in the line and secretly, without showing your opponent, peek at it and then return it back into the position that you took it from. Pretty helpful, right? Well, this action gets even better if you take it immediately after your opponent scored a point from a challenge they performed on their last turn, or after they gained a point from a challenge on your last turn. Then, if you choose to do the peek action immediately after, you instead get to look at any 3 face-down stones in the order of your choosing. And this makes it a pretty common action to take after your opponent has scored a point, because now you have a very good idea about what the line contains. And that brings us to the very last action, Boast. Before we learn about that, I just want to remind you that all of the actions you can take are listed on this helpful player reference, along with a picture of each of the symbols. This is very helpful when you're first playing, and while Boast is the most complicated action, it is fully explained on the other side. A boast is the big swing. It's risky, but the reward is great. It allows you to win or lose the game in a single action. If you believe you can name all of the face-down stones on the line, you can take this action and declare, I know all the hidden symbols. Now your opponent has 3 options, and these are all written on the reference card. They can either say, I believe you, have a point, and then you score a single point. You don't actually name any of the face-down stones. They are choosing not to test your knowledge and just give you a point instead, and then your turn is over. Or they can say, I don't believe you, prove it. Then you must name and flip over every face-down stone one at a time in any order you like. If you correctly name them all, you immediately win the game, no matter what the scores have been up to that point. But if you get even a single one wrong, you lose the game and your opponent wins. So this is why your opponent might say they believed you and just give you the point, because otherwise you could just win the game right there. But be careful, because if they challenge you and you mess up, then you just gave them the win. However, your opponent has a third option. They can also say, I don't care, I know what the stones are too. If they choose that option, they've stolen the boast from you, and now you have to respond with either option 1 or 2. You can't pick 3. This means that you'll want to boast when you feel that you know what all the face-down tiles are, and you're confident that they don't. Or you might just want to pretend to know what they are and hope that the other player doesn't challenge you and instead concedes the point. And those are all the rules for the head-to-head game. But I should mention that experienced players can have a little fun with each other by taunting one another during the game, calling out random symbols, maybe pausing during their turn to tell a little story, or anything else that might cause distraction. Just be careful not to distract yourself too much. I also mentioned that there are optional rules for 4 players who will be then split into 2 teams. This variant is known as the King's Round, and each team of 2 players will share a single scoring track. How you set up for 4 players and all the details for this mode can be found here in the rulebook, so be sure to read this section before you play, but I'll just highlight a couple of key differences in this mode. First of all, when a player takes a peek action, they can look at the stone as usual, or they could offer for their teammate to look instead. Also, when performing a challenge in a team game, it's the player to your left who must complete it. And if you boast, the player to your left decides how to respond, but then when proving the boast, it's completed by both teammates, alternating back and forth, naming and revealing face-down stones one at a time. So even in that aspect, it's a team effort. Also, during the game, teammates can discuss anything they like about the line, including what they think the face-down tiles might be, but these conversations must happen openly so everyone can hear what's being said. Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Tellstones King's Gambit. If you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. And hey, if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. But until next time, thanks for watching.